Thanks everyone for joining me for the Fusionary Health Podcast. Today, I have an incredible guest in store for you, Dr. Emi. She has been on her path to health that began with her own personal struggle, and her experience sparked a revolution in her approach to medicine, pushing her beyond traditional weight loss methods and into the depths of metabolism science. Her quest led her to own a remarkable 100-pound weight loss, uncovering the intricate connections between weight, inflammation, genetics, and food sensitivities. And that's what we're going to dive into today. What it took to lose 100 pounds, to get healthy, to really drive deep into the details of our own personal health and how personalized medicine and knowing the tests to get, knowing your own numbers can completely support you to help you achieve your metabolism goals, body composition goals, and health goals overall. So I can't wait for you to listen to this interview today. Good morning and welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Shivani Gupta, and this is the podcast dedicating to recalibrating your health every day. My goal is to help you wake up each day energized by addressing root causes and giving you new approaches to preventive health. The more we know about integrative health, the more empowered we are in building the vibrant health we want. Hello and welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. It's your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta, and I have an incredible guest in store for you today. Dr. Emi Hosoda is a practitioner of functional medicine, integrative medicine. She brings together a lot of modalities for her patients to help with their metabolism, with their overall health and well-being. So welcome, Dr. Emi, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Gupta. I'm really glad to be here.
For sure. So will you kick us off with sharing your journey? Because I was watching some interviews of you, and I know you went on this journey of losing 100 pounds and then being able to maintain that, which I think is the harder part. It's hard to lose weight, but even harder to somehow not yo-yo out of it and keep going up and down. And so will you kick us off with what led you to that health journey in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So, I've struggled with weight almost my entire life. I think since I've been in the United States at the age of 9, I started to have issues with my weight. As a really young kid, I actually went on this diet, like in the 5th grade, and I ended up having rheumatic fever because I was so malnourished, like trying to starve myself, just eating lettuce all the time. In college, I had another sort of bout with all this where I lost a lot of weight and then gained it back and then, got myself disciplined. I kind of had this aha moment where it was like a spiritual revolution for me to concentrate on my health. And I did really well for a while. First couple of years of medical school is very structured. So through the last years of college and first years of med school, I did well. But then in medicine, we have really horrible habits. So once I hit the wards in the hospital and started to actually be, training to be a doctor, that's when things really fell apart for me because there's really no time for good habits. I mean, you would work 36 hours and you would be served pizza when you went there. And so it was really tough to kind of keep on a good way of doing things. And in the middle of that, I also had 2 kids. And so I ended up at 235 pounds after having these 2 kids and nursing them and whatnot. And, I tried really hard with all the things that people tell you to do, eat less, exercise more. I was going up a mountain in our little town that I live in, Enumclaw, Washington, a couple times a week. I was eating 1,200 calories a day, and I just was not seeing the scale move at all. Then I had a friend teach a class on low sugar eating, and along with that class came some old-fashioned supplements that they used to have for insulin resistance that had chromium picolinate and some CLA in them. And for the first time when I took those supplements, I actually saw that my sugar cravings went away. And I used to have these drug reps come to the office and they would always bring the most sugary foods, donuts or pasta. And I remember I could not say no to it. It would come to my office and I just had zero self-control. Even though I was eating 1,200 calories a day, I would eat this junk that would come in. And I remember when I first started taking this class, I started really watching the sugar in my food and trying to eat higher quality food and taking this supplement that really helped insulin resistance. And what happened was I just like lost my craving for stuff. And I basically had like the drug rep for Crestor come to my office, and she brought a bunch of candy and I kicked her out of my office. I was like, I have diabetics coming here. I'm pre-diabetic. I don't need this in my office anymore. And so I lost a lot of weight then. I lost like almost 85 pounds. But then menopause hit and it became really hard to lose weight. The weight gradually crept back on. I never broke the 200-pound barrier again. I still stayed under 100 pounds because I had better habits and my insulin resistance was under some control. But I really hadn't solved a lot of problems. And a lot of women can get away with not solving problems prior to menopause because your body's just much more forgiving. And so, you might be mercury toxic like I am, but your body will have better ways of dealing with that. Once your hormones really start to drop, that's not so true anymore. So I really had to go back and really look at what are the reasons that people hang on to fat. A lot of the literature that's not really emphasized, like inflammation, is a reason people hang on to fat. Beyond insulin resistance, there's issues with a hormone called adiponectin, for instance, which is made in the mitochondria, the little energy packets in the cells. And this hormone can become lower as we age, as our little energy packets, which are much more susceptible to damage, get damaged. And so, I had really low adiponectin. No doctor had even thought about checking that. And I actually started reading about it because one of the labs that did cardiac labs had that as one of the labs they did. And I was like, what's this adiponectin? And I started reading about it and I was like, wow, I'm really low on it. And it really has a lot to do with insulin resistance. Leptin is something most docs don't look at. And a lot of people have issues with leptin. Leptin is a hormone that's made in fat that goes to your brain and tells your body to stop eating and burn fat. And, a lot of women have leptin resistance as we get older. That's one of the changes that happens with the hormones that drop at menopause. And so, a lot of people think like, oh, if I overeat, it's a personal failing. It's not. It's your hormones really failing to like stop your appetite where they should. And so when I learned about all these things and started implementing, taking my body to a lower inflammatory state, looked at, solving these issues with some of these other hormones besides insulin, really getting insulin under control, because those old-fashioned supplements were okay, but I had to kind of design my own that had the right kind of chromium that was good for the kidneys, that had berberine, which a lot of people know can change your gut microbiome, increase a bacteria called Akkermansia, which is very important in GLP-1 production, GLP-1 being a hormone that also has a lot to do with appetite control. So I designed the supplement that really helped insulin and leptin resistance. It had something in it called DNF10, which really helps with, correcting the leptin signal in the brain. Because a lot of times when you look at women in menopause, their leptin levels are actually high, but their brain has stopped listening to the signal at all. They're leptin resistant. And then there's people that have issues with leptin genes where they don't make enough leptin. And even for those people, if you can improve the way the brain listens to the leptin signal, they're going to do better. So really what I learned was that every one of us is unique, and every one of us has different things that are going to work for us. And for me, for instance, one of the big revelations was doing my genetics and finding out that I had 2 bad copies of a gene called FTO, which actually makes you much more likely to be obese and requires a lot more protein than most people think to help you lose weight. So I never really cut calories, but I increased my protein. I corrected some of these hormonal things that were going on, and the weight just came off and stayed off.
Wow. That's incredible. There's so much to unpack there. As you were speaking, I was like, these are all separately important. But the problem is most people are like, I just want to lose weight. And so I'm just going to address food and exercise. And I know so many women around me who have talked about, okay, I'm just going to cut my calories to 1,200 a day. That's the calorie restriction I need to do to lose weight. And I look at them like, that's just going to be a rubber band. Like, there's no way you're going to hold that. Think about what you're saying. And then others are like, we're aging, so we shouldn't do HIIT training and work out so hard because the stress of it's going to be too much for us, which I've had that theory too. So I switched to like lifting and yoga and walking. But then I wonder, are we cutting out a category of exercise that's really important? Cutting out, cardio in general. And so what are your thoughts on some of these extreme diets that people kind of put themselves on that are kind of the undercurrent of constant yo-yo dieting? And then we're going to talk about a lot of the science that you mentioned and what you said.
Yeah. So if your body's only burning 1,200 calories a day, there's a reason for that. And so I really do encourage people, like, if that's what it takes for you to lose weight, there's something wrong. And you can get to a thin body, but if you're like going to ruin your joints in the process, or your muscle tone, or if you are going to ruin your health doing that, or you're going to leave all these underlying health issues that actually led to your weight that are going to creep up on you, and you're not going to have a healthy life, like, what's the use of getting to the right body composition? Because you want to get to the right body composition so you can have a better life, And so for me now, like, I can dance the night away in heels, but I could have never done that. I couldn't have even gotten out of bed in my 30s because I was so ill with the inflammation that was going on with me. So what I really want people to think about is not just transforming their body, but really transforming their health so that they can enjoy that body for a long time. And the only way you can do that is to really figure out what got you here in the first place and correct that problem, or those problems. For most people, it's more than one thing.
True. And don't you think, this is a thought I had this morning, was how we're eating is changing everything about us. So if you don't address sugar, what happens to you?
Yeah, so sugar is a big thing because it has a lot of different effects in the body. One of the things it can do is actually, spike insulin and then put you in this place where you don't really burn calories because your insulin's so high. And insulin is kind of like an anabolic hormone for fat, the way maybe testosterone is for muscle. And so if you are eating a lot of sugar and spiking your insulin up, you're kind of setting yourself up for hanging on to more fat. The other thing it can do is it can actually impair the way that your liver handles toxicity. And so that's one of the reasons that I really avoid sugar. And then it can also change your gut bacteria to a less favorable bacteria. What we're finding out is that the composition of the bacteria and fungi in your gut, which fungi are like, fungus, basically, that has a lot to do with the signals that get sent to your brain. Also, they affect things like leptin signaling and all of that. And so eating a really high sugar diet can change the composition of the bacteria in your gut. So can actually artificial sweeteners, and maybe worse. So they're not the solution either. So it's really important to have a diet that really feeds your gut good nutrients, and really puts the power and the balance of those microbes in the right direction.
Sure. And here's a thought I had today. When we age, we're in our 20s, we're so resilient. The gut microbiome is resilient. We damage it, it just bounces back. We get to our 30s, maybe that accumulation of antibiotics use, over antibiotic use, stress, sugar, alcohol, lack of sleep, whatever it is we are doing as our poor lifestyle habits takes a toll. And in our 30s, we become a little less resilient. So you see a lot of people say, you know what, I just can't party like I used to. I can't go out like I used to. I can't drink like I used to. Oh, this is aging. Then you hit 40s. 40s is a whole new wake-up call. And every woman around me for the last couple of years has said, I'm tired. I don't have the same energy. I'm eating and working out the same, but suddenly I'm gaining weight. I'm gaining weight in my middle. I don't understand. And I'm in my mid-40s. And so I can just imagine what the conversation around me will be 50s and 60s, because we know that the average age of menopause in the United States is about 51, 52 years old. We know that perimenopause starts up to a decade earlier, or around a decade earlier. So I'm in the middle of perimenopause as a transition. And I, as someone who teaches health, am always like, I've got the answers. All right. And if I don't have them, I will find them. I will figure it out for myself. And that's how I'll teach it. I think the biggest problem is all of us in the health and wellness space know insulin resistance, glucose spikes, inflammation, oxidation, gut microbiome, inflammation caused by a lot of factors, external factors, toxins, mold, like you've talked about, food intolerances, heavy metal exposure. There's a big bucket there that can cause the inflammation piece. Sure. It all is a factor. Hormones. Our hormones are tanking. But each person's bio-individual, and they want the quick answer. Everyone wants the 1, 2, 3 step process to winning, and they don't want to accept that, I'm sorry, but this is a 10 to 15 step process to get you where you want. So how do you explain that to your clients when they show up and want the simple answer?
Yeah, it's a hard thing. Really, some people, I've done it more stepwise, kind of pick the most important thing and gone on. But then there's a lot of people who are like, I don't really have time to waste. I want you to do everything and figure out exactly what my issue is. And that's what I kind of like to do, because then I know everything and I know how to target everything towards them. But there's something you said in there that I think is really important, and that's the age of menopause. It's actually 48 to 52 in America, and I've seen it younger and younger. As a person that does women's health, I've seen younger people going through menopause where their hormones are tanking earlier. And what a lot of people don't understand is those hormonal changes actually start in your late 30s. So DHEA, which is a hormone that is made in our adrenal glands, DHEA goes to the brain or pituitary and is the signal to shut off cortisol production. So when your DHEA falls, your cortisol can spike. That change tends to happen in your late 30s, early 40s. Progesterone starts to fall at that age. And I really think we don't really talk about how important progesterone can be for, basically maintaining muscle mass, for mood, for appetite control. I know when I started it, it was like 2 years ago. So I was 53, just in a lot of denial about menopause. And I really didn't go through it till I was 54. But I really think I'd been low on progesterone for many years before that, probably starting in my late 30s. And so progesterone is also a precursor to adrenal hormones, precursor to a lot of different hormones that we use. And so, it's really important to understand that these changes aren't just happening at menopause, they're happening before.
No, you're so right. 48 to 52. Thank you. It's a window for menopause. And 10 years earlier, late 30s, we start this hormone tanking and we forget, okay, I need to find a different way through. So are you a big fan of doing hormone replacement therapy? A fan of because for me, I have jumped all in. I'm always a fusionary girl. I fuse my East and my West. I want my Ayurveda, but you know what? Modern science has some great tools right now that we can reach into for support. So taking testosterone, game changer. Adjusted my thyroid meds, way outside what a traditional doctor would do, using functional medicine, using a completely different approach, because I'm subclinical thyroid. No normal doctor would prescribe me. Then progesterone. And I finally got progesterone. And when we tested, I was postmenopausal progesterone. And like you just said, I knew that in my heart with how high estrogen I was likely very low progesterone for quite a while there. That's why I was forming fibroids and things at the rate that I was. So a lot of times we have to become this incredible scientific investigator of our health. And even within functional medicine, sometimes I find, because I'm on my third practitioner now, where I hired them to do a deep dive on me and give me answers. Sometimes we really need to find the one who's actually obsessed with metabolism the way we need to be. Because if we're not going to really worry about our metabolism as we age, how are we going to maintain not just the body composition? Body composition matters. Yes, I care about my joint health because that's the force on my feet, but everything else, the body composition is just the outward expression of what is happening internally, and how are we going to bring those two into alignment? So when it comes to HRT, what are you a fan of, and what have you seen has really supported your patients?
Well, one main thing I would say is individuality. And, if you do have what's called estrogen dominance, where your estrogen levels are far above your progesterone, that's, the term for estrogen dominance. The important thing to figure out is what estrogens are those and why are they high? So, and a lot of women have it. I mean, I was high in estrogen, probably in my teens, and high in testosterone. I was a PCOS girl. But there's women that only develop it in their 30s or 40s. They were just fine before that. And so what I do to figure that out is actually look at their genetics. So do their genetics say they're going to have issues with clearing estrogen? If they do, then I kind of have a cautionary way of looking at how I'm going to do hormone replacement for them. If their genetics are okay, then I'm going to wonder, why are they not clearing estrogen? Do they have an issue in their gut health where they have a high beta glucuronidase, an enzyme in the gut that can cut the bonds of estrogen and glucuronol, which is a glucuronol group? Your liver actually puts glucuronol groups on whatever it wants to get rid of, including excess hormones. And so if you have inflammation in your gut lining, you will increase an enzyme called beta glucuronidase, which will cut the detox work that the liver does. It will cut that glucuronol group that the liver has put on something to eliminate it and put it in the gut, and then put that, whatever it is, back in the circulation. And so that can be a reason for high estrogens, is that you have gut inflammation for some reason. You're eating foods you're sensitive to. You have some sort of chronic infection like parasite or bad bacteria that's, at a low level. So that's one reason that someone can have high estrogen. Another reason could be heavy metals. So high lead, for instance, can prevent you from metabolizing estrogen. High mercury, which was my issue, can prevent you from metabolizing estrogen properly. And then molds can do it. So mold toxins can prevent you from, basically metabolizing your estrogen. So if you do have estrogen dominance, really look at the reason. And then the other test I like to do is called a Dutch test, which is a test that looks at hormone metabolism. And the reason I like to do that particular test is I kind of want to see what your estrogen metabolites are like. Are they sort of low risk estrogen metabolites like 2-hydroxyestradiol, or are they really high risk metabolites like 6-hydroxyestrone, which has been linked to breast cancer and other issues, with this particular high estrogen metabolite. So I really want to know specifically what's going on with your estrogens, and I want to know why so that I can correct it. What a lot of people don't know about estrogen is that it can also affect thyroid function, specifically taking T4, the kind of thyroid that your thyroid makes, to T3, which is the kind of thyroid that your body actually uses. And so a lot of that conversion occurs in the liver. Some of it occurs in the gut, some in muscle. Your thyroid gland only makes about 10% T3, which is the usable thyroid. Most of it is this T4 that your body then has to convert. And so if your estrogens are high, you're going to be less effective at making T3, which is what your body needs. Also, if your testosterone's low or your vitamin D's low, that's going to affect your thyroid. So, there's a lot of factors that affect all of this hormone balance. And so it's really important, if you're having struggles, to figure out what is going on with you specifically, because that is where you're going to really, gain the knowledge to help yourself.
Sure. And a lot of people around me say, well, I have insurance and I went to the doctor and they tested me. And the doctor said, I don't need a lot of these tests that you're talking about. And my point to them is, because they don't have a pill for that problem. But that doesn't mean that you don't need the data, because the data is still relevant to the big puzzle that is you. I am a really big puzzle. Unfortunately, it's probably why I'm so obsessed with Ayurveda and functional medicine. So it benefits everyone else, but I spend thousands of dollars per year, every year. And I do a lot of the testing you're talking about. And my friends and family and people are like, why do we need so much testing? I'm like, well, if you don't have the data on yourself, it's like when you go to get your car fixed, if you didn't get a diagnostic, how would they be able to fix the underlying issues with the engine or anything else going on? Same thing with the body. We do need a decent amount of detailed testing to understand ourselves. I even have this example with my son. Recently, he was having a health struggle. I went to University of Miami endocrinology, like, I need an answer. And my gut said, you might not be happy with their answer. It might not give you the detail you need to execute anything. So why don't you also call up your own functional medicine doctor, order a stool test on the kid, and at least get one more piece of his puzzle? Lo and behold, the stool test was, oh my gosh, I don't even want to talk about it, but he basically has a parasite, horrible gut dysbiosis, total indication of inflammation. So that explains now what her blood work said, not just, oh, you need to go tell this kid to change his diet. And so when it comes to clients, I hear you that it's so bio-individual. Are there any best practices in terms of understandings that people can think about that will lead them to be willing to do this kind of testing?
Well, I think you really have to prioritize yourself. And it's very hard to get women to do that. A lot of times women will do things for their kids and even their pets before they will do it for themselves. And so, I think one important message for me to women is you're an important person and your family depends on you. So it's really important for you to be the best that you can be so that you can be the best that they need you to be. It's not like selfish. It's really, putting yourself and valuing yourself like you should be. And a lot of people will say like, why do we need all these tests now? Like people lived all these thousands of years and never had them. We live in a really different environment. I mean, a lot of what we do in functional medicine is actually fight what's going on in the environment and our planet. And I can't really talk about this without bringing this up. I mean, our food system does have a lot of additives, preservatives. If you are going to eat like just conventional bread, you're going to have potassium bromate, which is something that can actually mess with your thyroid function in your bread, And so just educating people about the environmental impacts of some of what we're going through is pretty important. So those are some takeaways for everybody. Really look at, what's in your food. Try to avoid things that are over processed. But then there's a lot of specific answers that aren't just in the regular, wisdom. For instance, how much protein is good for you? Do you need like 1 gram per kilogram of body weight that you want to get to? Or do you need 2 grams? Because that's a very genetic answer. Do you do well with saturated fat or poorly? Genetic answer. Are you going to do well on keto or not well on keto? Genetic answer. So a lot of these things are very specific. How are these hormones that I'm going to give you affect you? Well, that's a genetic answer, but it's also a gut health answer. It's a toxicity answer. And they're not just answers that you can give people like off the bat, except for telling them that there's all these factors that go into these answers.
Sure. Are there any things, like any questions we can have the audience think about? The ones that come to mind for me are, do you crave sugar? Like, do you crave it and you just want it? And then when you see it, you can't even help yourself. Do you feel like you have a crash every day at 3:00? Do you wake up every night in the middle of the night? That could be a sugar crash. When you sit down to eat, do you have any cues to tell you when to stop eating, or could you just keep going and going and going? If I'm in a restaurant and we're eating, I will eat triple the meal without thinking about it. And then afterwards, I'll think, why am I sick? Oh, I ate. So I literally walk into restaurants because the food's going to taste way too good and I might not be paying attention. I'm with company and I'll decide the amount that's appropriate for a nutritious meal. And then I have to tell myself, you're packing half this meal. This is not a dose. This is not a dose. This is not a quantity that's acceptable for a normal meal size. It's way too much for your blood glucose levels, for your stomach size, everything. And that's leptin that we can test for and we can get data on. And I know that most of the world is reaching into, or much of the world is reaching into GLPs because they're like, I just need something. Nothing is working for me. Nothing. So I'm just going to go take the solution because I just don't know what else to do. And when I think about it, the answer is not that we all have a GLP-1 deficiency. It's that we all need to figure out what is our correct equation. Maybe we reach into those tools to kickstart some help. I get that completely, actually. But where are we missing the puzzle when it comes to our own puzzle pieces of our health to give ourselves those blocks? So what are some of those questions you would think to ask them so that they can kind of self-assess, oh yeah, maybe this is something I need to dive deeper into?
So, one tip that I can give everyone is to start their meals with fiber. That really helps leptin levels kind of for everybody. So, celery, cucumbers, nuts. There was a study done in India where they gave people almonds, which I'm not a huge fan of almonds because they have a lot of omega-6s, but they also have a lot of fiber. So they gave them almonds, which had fat and fiber, 15 of them, like 20 minutes before their meal. And the people that did that versus people who ate the same calorie meal actually lost a lot more weight, even though they were eating more. They were eating almonds before, and the other group wasn't. And so that's one way that you can stack the deck in your favor is eat something that has a good fat and fiber about 15 minutes before you're going to eat your main meal. I do walnuts more because they have more omega-3s. Macadamia nuts are also good. They have a good saturated fat in them. So those are like some of the things that you could do is eat like with macadamia nuts. So they're very like fatty. So I usually do like 5 of those. If I'm going to do them with walnuts, I might do 15 pieces or something. But that's one tip is, something to kind of help you with blood sugar is always take fiber. And if you're craving sugar, eat something that's high fiber. But really like some of the things that you need to look into if you're someone who has sugar cravings is what is your leptin level fasting? What is your insulin level? What is your adiponectin level? And then the best test for insulin resistance actually isn't to test the sugar. A lot of people don't know this, but the thing that goes awry first is the size of the fat particles in your blood when you're insulin resistant. So testing for sugar is actually a little late in the game. There's a test I do called LPIR. It's actually available at LabCorp. There's an LPIR plus insulin resistance score that you can get based on the amount of fat in your blood. And so that actually can go awry 10 to 15 years before you actually see the blood sugar start going up in someone. So that's a test that I usually like to do to figure out if someone's insulin resistant, is this very detailed test of the lipids in their blood or the fat in their blood, because that's going to give you, data that you're not going to get from just looking at sugar. So if you're having cravings and you suspect you might be insulin resistant, look into these hormones, look at your insulin levels, fasting, sugar, but also look at this LPIR, look at your adiponectin and your leptin levels.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's so important to kind of dig under the hood and look at those detailed numbers so that we can understand what's actually happening here. Now, let's say you have someone in their 40s or 50s where they're already past that mark. It's like A1C is higher in the 5.8 plus range, cholesterol's high. And a lot of the people around me are like, this must be genetics. Like, this wasn't there before. I haven't changed anything. This must be my genetic history, like coming at me. And I always think about that because I do work really hard for my health in terms of exercise, food, and all these things. And I wonder if we're just not supporting the body from the ground up for what you talked about earlier. Like our mitochondria will decline. Our hormones, we know, are going to go on a roller coaster through perimenopause till they're just tanked in menopause. We know that menopause and the transition to it is a huge endocrine brain. It's a neuroendocrine shift that happens. It's a big transition that occurs. And so I always think of it as building blocks. Does my body have what it needs to work? It doesn't? Okay. I need to increase my vitamin D. Is my gut microbiome supported? Where are all the hormone supports I need for this transition? Can I take them from an injection standpoint and pill standpoint? But will I also support their precursors with food? And like you mentioned, a lot of our food nowadays I can't trust when I eat spinach, I'm going to get the iron support I need, even if it's organic. What if it's lost its nutrient density on its way to me? And so what are some of the thoughts that you have around, okay, guys, I know that aging is tough. Don't blame genetics and throw in the towel. Acknowledge that there's other pieces to the puzzle here. And really, we just need to change our approach to our hormone health and our mitochondrial health, our oxidation and inflammation that accumulates as we age. And it's that accumulation that's the problem. So we have to live an even more anti-inflammatory lifestyle, an even more anti-inflammatory diet. We kind of have to step up to the plate, I think every half decade at a new level. And I know you don't want to, but that's kind of the knowledge base we have now for why we're getting these chronic metabolic diseases rooted in inflammation.
Yeah, I mean, it can be genetics, and sometimes knowing the specific of your genetics can be really helpful. So, knowing that you have an issue with the adipoq gene and can't make adiponectin well might be helpful. But then you still have to know what your adiponectin level is. So the genetics is one piece of the puzzle. There's people that have genetic problems with absorbing magnesium, for instance. Magnesium really helps with sugar cravings. So that's, an important thing to know about yourself. But a marker you could get maybe at your doctor is a red blood cell magnesium. That looks at your magnesium over 3 months. A lot of times it's surprising that people will have normal snapshots of magnesium, but their 3-month magnesium, red blood cell magnesium, is low and they have sugar cravings. So those are, really some of the things that can be complex because yes, it can be genetic, but also like you were talking about, all of us age and all of us will have issues with our mitochondria, our little energy packets of the cell, which are so prone to getting damaged from things like free radicals, which can be in processed foods, pollution, that sort of thing. And so as we age, all of us are getting those hits to our mitochondria, and it is something that you really need to address. How can you address it? One of the things is to make sure you're getting healthy fats. So omega-3s are really important when it comes to maintaining the cell membrane. Something called phosphatidylserine is an essential fatty acid that you can't really get much in food. That's super important for that. There's also some supplements that can help the mitochondria, things like CoQ10, alpha lipoic acid, which actually is an antioxidant that protects CoQ10. acetyl L-carnitine, which transports both into the mitochondria, pterostilbenes and phosphatidylserine, again, very important for the mitochondria. And then lifestyle-wise, avoiding processed foods that have a lot of preservatives, like the preservative BHT that's in a lot of preserved foods, is something that can damage the mitochondria. It's a free radical, one of the main things that damages the mitochondria. Trying to live in a clean environment. So even if you're in a place that's maybe polluted, have an air cleaner around, try to reduce the burden of toxins that you're being exposed to.
Absolutely. I love that. It's true. There is so much to do, and we forget that oxidative stress, oxidative damage is taking its toll over time. And that is a problem to the body. The body's being damaged as we live. And we're forgetting that fact when we're assuming that we're functioning the same way. But because it's happening on the cellular level, we don't acknowledge it. We don't realize it. And then when things get hard for us, we're like, oh, why is that hard? I realized at 43 to 44 last year, healing has changed. I got plantar fasciitis. It took 3 months and it didn't heal. I irritated things when I was lifting at the gym and they didn't heal. And I thought, whoa, okay, your healing capacity has diminished. That's going to be a problem over time. You're going to have to reinvest in how your body heals. What are you going to do about it? Well, reduce inflammation, shift diet even further. Are there still processed foods you have here? Are you drinking water on the road instead of carrying it around? Okay, carry more water from home that's filtered and proper. So it's interesting that we have to keep looking at that puzzle of what it is that's happening to us and address it. When it came to losing that 100 pounds, you talked about mercury. Was that dental mercury, or were there some other big things you learned about yourself that you had to shift for yourself?
It was dental mercury. For a lot of people, it can be eating fish that have a lot of mercury, but that wasn't my issue. It was dental. And so it took me a long time to change that over. And then also, once you take the mercury out, actually two things, you have to be really careful how it's removed. So how it was removed for me actually put more mercury into my body. Pick a dentist that really knows how to take care of mercury. And then also, you generally have to do things to then remove it out of your body. So, and you need to do, a detoxification process that pulls it out of your tissues, but immediately binds it so it doesn't go north to your brain, and has, pathways of elimination for your kidneys and your gut. And so really work with somebody who understands how to do that, because a lot of people will detox and they'll actually make things worse for themselves. I want to go back to this idea of oxidative stress, though, and kind of explain it for people that may not have heard that term. So all of us have seen oxidative stress because we've all seen rust. That's what happens to iron, is when it gets exposed to oxygen-free radicals. Iron, which has a certain look, now becomes rust and becomes like this thing that, crumbles really fast. Well, that same thing can happen to our little energy packets in our cell, our mitochondria. They can get damaged by those same kinds of, what are called reactive oxygen species. They come when things burn, so they're very high in pollution. They can come in preservatives, because one of the way preservatives get rid of bacteria is actually causing this kind of damage to their cells. Well, guess what? They can also damage our cells. So it's something that, we're all exposed to in our environment, and lowering our exposure is really important because we don't want to rust on the inside.
I agree. And let's take that idea further. So I was doing a lot of research on aging to speak at A4M, the longevity conference last year. And when I sat in the science, and I keep saying this, but it was so impactful to me, we should all do a deep dive on aging. Just sit in PubMed and study aging for 3 months, and you will see why I'm so obsessed with the topic. But it said our oxidative stress on the system is causing all of these damaged cells to exist. Well, guess what happens to damaged cells? If you don't clear them out, they're just running into everything, causing more damage. We have zombie cells, we have damaged cells. So the body, when you're having even more damage, that's inflammation. We're having inflammatory systems, inflammatory cascades. We're having all this inflammation in the system, and then we're not realizing that we're inflammaging, and inflammaging is the problem. And we're blaming, oh, I didn't work out enough. Oh, I ate too many calories. Oh, it was that dark chocolate. Oh, I feel like we self-blame so much. And instead of looking outwards and saying, what are the factors influencing me, and how will I remove those factors? So last year, I changed out all my makeup. I switched from a brand that I had loved for 20 years and moved to a completely non-toxic line, because I thought, well, if you're going to put makeup on to be on podcast, That's a daily insult you're going to give to your body. That was
Yeah.
one. Then it's like, okay, what are my other daily insults? My toothpaste, my beauty products, like everything you're using, think about each one as having 50 chemicals in it and that adding up to damage inside your system. And then how well are you
Yeah.
detoxing? And in Ayurveda, I teach a lot about detoxing. And I do that because there's a daily accumulation, but how are you de-accumulating? How are you removing that? And so where have you seen the work that you've done really support your patients to create these transformations that they're looking for? And before that, will you speak a little into this oxidation inflammation cycle that we end up being in?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of data that inflammation makes you hang on to weight because basically your body thinks it's under attack. And in the old days when your body was under attack, it was some sort of bacteria or virus that was going to divide really quickly. And so your body would hang on to calories to give you, what you needed to quote, fight this, infection. But now a lot of times the inflammation is some hidden chronic sort of bacterial infection that's going on, or it's, your food causing this damage because it has BHT or other preservatives. And so these things can, for instance, damage your gut wall. So your gut wall becomes leaky and you can leak things across that cause damage and inflammation. You can damage the lining of your cells. And so, or the mitochondria, which are the energy packets in your cell, also have a lining that's similar to the lining of your cell. So that can become damaged. And then you can't make, you can't take energy and turn it into what you need it to, which is heat. You sort of store it instead. And so it is a really, interesting part of aging, but it's really an interesting part of, being exposed to toxicities really and pollution. Yeah.
Exactly. And that accumulation.
Yeah. And like fires actually will make a lot of these free radicals. So will like, manufacturing of different things. Anything that burns something is going to make free radicals. Exercise makes free radicals, but your body has ways of controlling those small amounts of free radicals. And there's some data that you actually need those free radicals to get some of the good effects of exercise. So there's some data that if you take antioxidants prior to exercise, you won't do as well as if you take them afterwards.
Right.
And so, free radicals aren't all bad, but when they get out of control and they, start to damage parts of your body, that's when they really increase inflammation. So for me, like I go to my exercise fasted, and then I take my blend of my antioxidants like right afterwards, and I take them at night. So
Perfect. That makes sense. That makes total sense.
yeah.
So have you had any clients where you've been able to support them on their journey using these tools that you use? I love that you're using genetic testing to understand the details of how they need to support themselves. I've done DNA testing on myself and learned so much around, oh, you're not going to be great at making vitamin D. So that was just an indication. Take double. Like these are the ways your body's not going to do what you want it to do. And taking the regular dose supplements might be a waste of your time. You're going to have to double down. So I've really focused now on my CoQ10, vitamin D, antioxidants, glutathione, the things that came out in my test that showed me, oh, you're actually great at working out and lifting and all these athletic pursuits. That's why you love to work out. But over here, you're not a great detoxer. So now I infrared sauna more consciously. So it's such a beautiful blueprint support on your genetics. And you only have to do it one time. Your genetics don't change. And then
Right.
you get to go and do all this detailed work on the current status of things and then constantly see, okay, well, I made these changes based on this data. Now, where am I? Where do I stand? And so where have you seen this support some of your clients? Do you have like a favorite client story?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few favorite client stories. And vitamin D is a really important one because there's actually studies showing that people that have vitamin D receptor problems and don't bind vitamin D well will lose a lot more weight if they double their vitamin D and sort of have a level more like in the 80s range instead of the 30s or 40s or 50s where most people consider it normal. So that's really interesting. But yeah, I've had a few really dramatic client stories. So I had a nurse that came to me who she is actually a hospice nurse. She had tried all kinds of things. She'd actually gone to a doctor and was on GLP-1s and two other drugs that were weight loss / diabetes drugs. One was Farxiga and the other was metformin. So she was on these three drugs, but she was 259 pounds. She's only 5'4". Her hemoglobin A1C was 14. And she just hurt all over, couldn't even get out of bed and was very depressed. So what we did for her was actually figure out genetically what the right diet for her was. We removed her food sensitivity so that her gut could heal. I actually figured out that she had microscopic colitis in the middle of all this, which is an inflammatory bowel issue. And so we were able to correct that. And then with the diet and exercise and the supplements, she was a person that didn't absorb magnesium, for instance. Her magnesium was in the toilet. Her vitamin D receptor didn't work. Her vitamin D was in the toilet. So by correcting a lot of these factors and then helping her to naturally deal with her insulin resistance through diet and supplements, she was able to come off of all of these medications, including the GLP-1, the Farxiga, which is like a diuretic type thing that, makes you pee sugar, and the metformin, and to really, come down to like the 160s range as far as her weight, and, reverse really all of these issues. So she's lost about 100 pounds, is still in the process of losing it. I have another patient that actually had mold toxicity as the reason that she was not basically, metabolizing estrogens. So she was really estrogen dominant. So getting rid of the mold and also figuring out what her food sensitivities were. She was a person that hung on to a lot of water. And she had already gone gluten-free, but she was still eating a lot of gliadin. What a lot of people don't understand is that gliadin, which is in oats, millet, and buckwheat, can be just as inflammatory for some people as gluten is. And so she was eating a lot of gliadin, and that was making her hang on to water. And so being able to reduce the inflammation in her gut and get rid of the mold for her was what brought her down to her goal weight. And she looks absolutely fabulous. So there's a lot of people that, really benefit from getting to the root cause of their issues. And it's not just their weight, because this person, she was on medications for edema for the amount of water that she was hanging on to, but it was really just an inflammatory reaction to something she was eating this whole time.
Yeah. And it's just about finding what is that root cause issue. And typically if people don't ask you and test for your food sensitivity, they'll never get to that and understand what is the culprit. You mentioned metformin, and I know a lot of people reach for metformin first when it comes to prediabetes, but I've also seen a lot of people who've taken it have gut issues from it. And in Ayurveda, we are gut first. We are all about beautiful, healthy gut digestive fire. And so what are your thoughts on it? Because I've heard it's good for longevity and prevention, but then that gut thing really scares me.
Yeah. So, metformin does make changes in the microbiome. But my biggest issue with metformin is that it really overly blocks a pathway called mTOR, which blocking mTOR is helpful in that it stops the progression of cancer. So that's why a lot of holistic cancer regimens will use metformin. But the downside of it is that also keeps you from building muscle well. And that's why I don't love metformin. I kind of like to use what I call the natural metformin. Some people call it the natural Ozempic, but I think that's not really true for berberine. I think berberine is really more the natural metformin. I use a wildcraft berberine from India in my practice. That's a name brand, actually. So it's third-party tested and very, good from pill to pill. But the good thing about berberine is it makes those same changes. It actually increases akkermansia. It helps some of the gut microbiome. It can kill off yeast. So with berberine, actually, I have videos with my supplements to tell people to take it very slowly and build it up so that they don't get a big yeast die-off from it. But the nice thing about berberine is it has a lot of those good effects that metformin has, but it doesn't overly block the mTOR pathway so that you can still build muscle when you take berberine. And that's a very big difference because muscle dictates metabolism. I just did a video called, Thick Thighs Save Lives, talking about how the muscles in your lower extremity have a lot to do with your longevity. And so if something is keeping you from building muscle, I'm a little bit suspect of it.
Me too. Absolutely. So many of us are working so hard. We know perimenopause, menopause, we need to lift. We need those lower body workouts. Lower body is my favorite by a long shot. So I always make sure I get to my leg days. But yeah, if we're going to take something that stops building muscle, but we're trying to take it for our longevity and health, that sounds counterintuitive to me.
Yeah. So I kind of would prefer berberine, which is in, the product that I made to help me lose 100 pounds, because I think it has a lot of the same benefits without a lot of the same downsides.
Nice. That's awesome. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about today that you think of when it comes to this idea of losing excess weight that we have on the body, but while keeping and building optimal, vibrant health? Because, like we talked about at the beginning, it's not just weight loss. I really do. When I look at weight loss, I think, of course, I want to look great. Who doesn't? Of course, I want great body composition. But if my blood work's always going to come back like crap because I got there using shortcuts, what's the point? And I think we really have to have the right mindset that you talked about around, okay, you know what? I have to come first because I have to address this and put time and energy and love into this as I age. So what are some of those things that we haven't talked about today that you want to get into?
So, I think I really want to encourage people to take a precision medicine approach to their health, to really figure out themselves, the things that they need to do, and really realize that they're bio-individual, they're a unique person. And, people love anecdotes of what worked for their friend. I mean, I had a patient yesterday being like, oh, I had a friend that lost weight doing this. And it's like, they are not you. And especially a lot of times when women try to look to men, for instance, for how they lost weight. I mean, our hormonal milieus are totally different. So, my husband basically, never gains weight. And if he ever eats like 5 or 6 pizzas in a row and stops doing it the next day, he loses the weight. So it's kind of a different, life. So really look for what is going to work for you and don't expect it to be the same thing that works for other people. The way that you can predict what that's going to be is information. So genetic testing, making sure that you don't have toxicities, looking at your gut health, looking at your food sensitivities and food allergies, looking to make sure you're not depleted on nutrients. Genetic testing is super helpful, though, because it tells you a lot about not just what nutrients you're likely to be low on and need more of, but it gives you a lot of information about gut health that you don't even get from gut health testing. It can tell you, like, are you sensitive to oxalates, which are in a lot of foods that people consider healthy, like spinach? Are you sensitive to salicylates? Are there things that are going to be part of your gut health journey that aren't part of other people's? Gluten sensitivity is highly genetic. Gliadin sensitivity is highly genetic. So those are things that you can predict even without, testing for some of those specifics that you might have a sensitivity to now. So I really highly, encourage people to do genetic testing to figure out those things about themselves. But I think, that list of tests of figuring out what's going on, you don't have to do them all at once, maybe budget and do them over time. But, in the end, like, have the goal of finding out about you so that you can do the right program that's going to help you specifically.
Absolutely. I love that answer. Personalized precision medicine is the way to really understand ourselves and the issues that we each have to address. We are bio-individual. And yes, this can get expensive. I know it firsthand because last year I finally looked at my budget and was like, you know what? My entire shopping and life fun budget is just going to go towards health. There's no other choice. Health has to be the priority, fixing these hormones and everything and getting on a track. And now I'm on the track and I feel fantastic. And so, like you just said, I do think we can just break these things down into quarters. Like maybe every quarter you get a test. And then by the end of a year and a half, you have this entire data snapshot. But you also slowly got to address the different things. Because sometimes when I go to functional medicine and I've got that binder on myself and they review it, they're like, sometimes you have a little too much information on yourself, Shivani, and you're really customizing diet. We don't want you to make yourself crazy. So let's take a step back and just look at the overall. And so, yeah, I think the idea of taking those tests, breaking them down over time could also give you the chance to incorporate the habits that each one taught you so that you're building on them as you go to get to the result that you want.
Yeah. And, I want to address expensive because, like, going out to eat now for a family of 4 can be up to like, it's always over 100 in just regular restaurants in my town, closer to 200. For $400, you can know your genetics, Some testing is a little expensive.
Wow.
Mold testing tends to be a little bit more like in the $600 range. But over time, if you think about what people spend on vacations, what people spend to go to an Usher concert, I mean, I had friends that were, basically struggling to get by, but paid $4,000 each to go to see Usher. What people spend on vacations just for a regular vacation, these tests are expensive, but they're not as expensive as really not being able to figure out your health and get to the right health so that you can go on vacations and do things as time goes on.
True. And we talk a lot about lifespan and quality of life in the longevity and health spaces. And I always think if I didn't have this data on myself in my 30s, if I didn't adjust my thyroid meds, adjust all these different things, my entire quality of life going through my 40s and 50s would have been horrible. And then at the end, when I had gained some horrible chronic metabolic disease, I wouldn't have understood why. And so here we have this opportunity to truly prevent and truly help ourselves. So thank you today for joining me, Dr. Emi. And will you share any last thoughts that you have for our audience and where people can find you?
So my last thoughts is value yourself and put yourself first. That's really the one thing that I can give you is like have that transformation in your mindset that puts your health first, like kind of get religion about your health, because that's what's going to carry you forward. And even when it comes to like being able to think as you get older, your physical health has a lot to do with that. So really prioritize that. You guys can find me at Dr. spelled out DOCTOR.Emi. On Instagram and TikTok. You can find me at www.dremi.com. On both Instagram and TikTok, you can go to my link tree. There's a lot of different information and different things that you can do to sort of glean information from those. And then also I'm on Facebook, Dr. spelled out space EMI. So those are all great ways to kind of connect, to learn more information about precision medicine and, things that you can do in your life to make yourself healthier and what to look for.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining. When I met you, I thought, what a unique story. A practitioner who figured out a new way to approach her health, who lost this weight, gave everyone hope that each of us, even in the medical space, a lot of times it's hard to stay healthy, like you said, because the schedule just overruns you. And so kind of giving hope that, look, there's a different approach. And even in menopause, getting even better results with your health is also inspirational. So thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everyone who listened today to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For any more information on this podcast, visit shivanigupta.com. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health Podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.